Welcome back to Age-Wise. I have been gardening for years, and if there is one thing I have learned, it is that the garden does not care how old you are. It will reward you with beauty and fresh vegetables, or it will punish you with sore knees, aching hands, and a whole lot of frustration. And for seniors, some mistakes are not just annoying, they can lead to real injuries, wasted time, and plants that never make it past the first season. Gardening should be enjoyable, not exhausting, but too many beginners jump in without realizing the simple choices that make all the difference. The wrong plants, the wrong tools, the wrong habits that leave you hurting instead of harvesting. Before you grab that shovel, let's go over the 12 biggest mistakes senior gardeners make and, more importantly, how to avoid them, because nothing ruins the joy of gardening like a bad back, dead plants, and a whole lot of regret. Mistake number 1, ignoring your body's limits. Gardening is rewarding, but it is also physical work. Digging, bending, lifting, reaching, it all adds up. One of the biggest mistakes senior gardeners make is pushing their bodies too hard, too fast. You might feel fine in the moment, but by the next morning, sore muscles, aching joints, and sometimes even real injuries will remind you that gardening is not as effortless as it looks. Research shows that as we age, muscle recovery slows down, flexibility decreases, and repetitive strain injuries become more common. Overworking can lead to tendinitis, joint pain, and even falls, especially if you are bending and lifting the wrong way. The warning signs are easy to ignore: a little stiffness, a slight ache. But when you keep going despite the discomfort, that minor strain can turn into weeks of pain. The solution? Listen to your body. Take breaks before you feel exhausted. Use a kneeling pad or a gardening bench to avoid overstraining your knees. Stretch before and after working in the garden. And most importantly, pace yourself. Your plants will still be there tomorrow. Overdoing it is a common mistake, but the next one? It happens before you even plant a single seed, and it can make or break your entire garden. Mistake number 2, choosing the wrong plants for your climate. When I first started gardening, I fell in love with a beautiful rosemary plant at the nursery. It smelled amazing, looked perfect, and I had big plans for fresh herbs in my cooking. There was just one problem. I live in a humid climate, and rosemary hates wet soil. Within weeks, it turned yellow, rotted at the roots, and died a slow, disappointing death. This is one of the biggest mistakes beginners make, picking plants based on looks rather than what actually thrives in their environment. The United States Department of Agriculture reports that nearly 30% of home garden failures happen because the plants are not suited to the local climate. Some plants need dry conditions, others need constant moisture. Some love full sun while others wilt under the heat. The first sign of trouble is usually slow growth, yellowing leaves, or plants that refuse to flower or produce vegetables. But the real problem is frustration. Nothing discourages a new gardener faster than plants that keep dying for no apparent reason. The fix is easy. Know your plant hardiness zone before buying anything. Check plant tags or ask a nursery expert if the plant will survive in your area. Choose native plants when possible. They are already adapted to your soil and climate, making them easier to maintain. Gardening is supposed to be enjoyable, not an endless cycle of trial and error. Save yourself the disappointment and start with plants that actually want to live in your garden. Have you ever planted something that failed miserably? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your biggest gardening regrets. And if you are finding these tips helpful, make sure to subscribe to Age-Wise for more smart gardening advice. The wrong plants can set you up for failure, but the next mistake is even worse because it wastes your time, energy, and money before you even see the problem. Mistake number 3, poor soil preparation. The first year I tried growing tomatoes, I did everything right, or so I thought. I picked a sunny spot, watered them regularly, and even staked them properly. But no matter what I did, they barely grew, and the few tomatoes I got were small and tasteless. Turns out the problem was not the plants, it was the soil. The National Resources Conservation Service states that soil health directly affects plant growth, disease resistance, and overall yield. If your soil is too compacted, drains poorly, or lacks nutrients, your plants will have a tough time growing, no matter how much you water them. The warning signs are easy to miss at first. Plants that sprout but do not grow, leaves turning pale or yellow, water pooling on the surface instead of soaking in. These are all signs that your soil needs attention before you plant, not after. Fixing this is simple, but most beginners skip it. Get a soil test. Many local garden centers or agricultural extensions offer inexpensive testing that tells you exactly what your soil needs. If your soil is too compacted, add compost or organic matter to improve drainage. If it lacks nutrients, mix in slow-release fertilizers or aged manure. Healthy soil means healthy plants. I wasted an entire growing season because I did not check my soil first. Do not make the same mistake. Test your soil, amend it properly, and your garden will thrive. And speaking of mistakes that can ruin your plants before they even have a chance, the next one is something many beginners do, thinking they are helping, but in reality, it is one of the fastest ways to drown your plants. Literally. Mistake number 4. Overwatering your plants. It is easy to think that more water means happier plants. After all, water is essential for growth. But too much of a good thing can be just as bad as too little. Overwatering is one of the most common beginner mistakes, and it is also one of the fastest ways to kill your plants. According to the University of California's Agriculture and Natural Resources Department, overwatering suffocates plant roots by reducing oxygen in the soil, leading to root rot, fungal diseases, and stunted growth. Plants do not drown instantly. The leaves may start turning yellow, growth slows down, and the soil stays damp for days instead of drying out. Many gardeners mistake this for underwatering and respond by adding even more water, making the problem worse. The best way to prevent overwatering is to check the soil before you water. Stick your finger about an inch into the soil. If it is still moist, wait a day or two. Use mulch to help retain moisture without flooding the roots, and always make sure your pots or garden beds have proper drainage. I learned this the hard way after losing an entire row of lettuce to root rot. Do not let the same thing happen to you. If you are finding these tips helpful, make sure to subscribe to AgeWise for more smart gardening advice. Watering mistakes are common, but the next one? It is a decision you make before you even start planting, and if you get it wrong, your garden will never reach its full potential. Mistake number 5, planting in the wrong location. Not all plants thrive in the same conditions. Some love full sun, others need shade. Some want protection from the wind, others need open space to spread their roots. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is planting in the wrong spot, forcing plants to struggle instead of thrive. The National Gardening Association states that sunlight, soil quality, and airflow are 3 of the most important factors in plant health. Placing a shade-loving plant in direct sun will scorch its leaves. A sun-loving vegetable stuck in too much shade will grow tall and weak, struggling to produce. Poor airflow encourages fungal diseases, while soil that stays too wet or too dry can weaken a plant's root system. The signs of trouble are not always obvious at first. Leaves may turn pale or curl, growth slows down, flowers and vegetables fail to develop properly. These issues often get mistaken for poor soil or watering mistakes, when the real problem is the location itself. The fix is simple. Before planting, observe your garden throughout the day. Notice where the sun hits, which areas stay shaded, and how the wind moves through. Check plant labels for light and spacing recommendations, and always group plants with similar needs together. A little planning goes a long way toward a thriving, low-maintenance garden. Choosing the wrong location can make gardening frustrating. But the next mistake? It is one that every beginner makes at least once, and it leads to overcrowded, struggling plants before you even realize what went wrong. Mistake number 6, planting too close together. In the excitement of starting a garden, it is tempting to plant everything close together. The seedlings look small and the extra space seems unnecessary. But as they grow, overcrowding leads to weak, unhealthy plants that compete for sunlight, water, and nutrients. The University of Minnesota Extension warns that overcrowded plants are more prone to disease, stunted growth, and poor air circulation, which creates the perfect environment for mold and pests. When plants do not have enough space, their roots tangle, leaves overlap, and they struggle to develop properly. Vegetables like tomatoes and squash become smaller and produce fewer fruits. Flowers fail to bloom. Even hardy plants become more vulnerable to stress. The first sign of overcrowding is usually slow growth and yellowing leaves, especially on the lower part of the plant. Plants may start leaning, stretching toward the sun because they do not have enough room to spread naturally. Once overcrowding happens, fixing it means thinning or transplanting, which can damage roots and set plants back weeks. The best way to avoid this is to read spacing guidelines on seed packets or plant tags and resist the urge to plant too closely. It may look sparse at first, but giving plants enough room will lead to stronger, healthier growth. Crowded plants struggle to survive, but the next mistake? It is a simple habit that can make or break your entire garden, yet so many beginners forget to do it. Mistake number 7, forgetting to mulch. Mulch is one of the easiest ways to improve your garden, yet so many beginners skip it. Without mulch, your soil dries out faster, weeds take over, and temperature changes stress your plants. Adding a simple layer of mulch can make the difference between a thriving garden and one that constantly struggles. The University of Florida's Gardening Extension states that mulch helps retain soil moisture, suppress weeds, regulate temperature, and even improve soil health as it breaks down. Without it, plants are more vulnerable to heat stress in the summer and frost damage in the winter. Water evaporates quickly, leaving the soil too dry, and bare soil becomes compacted, making it harder for roots to grow. The best way to use mulch is to apply a 2 to 3 inch layer around your plants, keeping it slightly away from the base to prevent rot. Organic mulches like shredded leaves, bark, or straw not only protect the soil, but also enrich it over time. I did not use mulch in my first garden, and I spent way too much time battling weeds and watering constantly. Once I added it, my plants grew stronger with half the effort. If you are finding these tips helpful, subscribe to AgeWise for more smart gardening advice. Skipping mulch is an easy mistake to fix, but the next one? It is something that seems harmless at first, but over time it can cause your plants to grow weak and lifeless. Mistake number 8, neglecting to prune. Pruning feels intimidating to many beginners. The idea of cutting away parts of a plant can seem wrong, like you are doing more harm than good. But skipping pruning leads to weak, overgrown plants that produce fewer flowers, fruits, and vegetables. According to the University of California's Agriculture and Natural Resources Department, regular pruning improves air circulation, encourages stronger growth, and helps prevent diseases. Without it, plants waste energy on dead or overcrowded branches instead of focusing on healthy new growth. The first signs of neglect are leggy stems, tangled branches, and fewer blooms or fruits. Plants like tomatoes, roses, and fruit trees become dense and unmanageable, making them more prone to pests and fungal infections. Some plants even stop producing altogether because their energy is spread too thin. Pruning does not have to be complicated. The key is to remove dead, damaged, or overcrowded branches regularly. For flowering plants, cutting back faded blooms encourages more flowers. For vegetables like tomatoes and peppers, removing lower leaves improves airflow and reduces disease risk. A little trimming goes a long way toward keeping plants healthy and productive. Overgrown plants can still recover with proper care, but the next mistake? It is one that happens slowly over time, and by the time you notice, the damage is already done. Mistake number 9, ignoring weeds until it's too late. I used to think weeds were just a minor inconvenience. A few here and there, nothing too serious. I would pull some out when I had time, but I never made it a priority. That was a mistake. One season, I let things slide for just a few weeks, and before I knew it, my garden looked like a jungle. Weeds were everywhere, choking my vegetables, stealing water from my flowers, and making the whole space look like an abandoned lot. By the time I tried to fix it, the damage was done. My tomato plants were struggling because the weeds had sucked up all the nutrients. My lettuce had disappeared under a blanket of fast-growing invaders. Worst of all, pulling them out was exhausting. Some had deep roots that refused to budge. Others had spread seeds everywhere, ensuring I would be dealing with the same problem again next year. What should have been an easy task turned into a full-blown war. The biggest mistake beginners make with weeds is waiting until they are out of control. Weeds grow fast, faster than your actual plants. They compete for sunlight, water, and nutrients, and some even attract pests. If you do not handle them early, they take over before you realize what is happening. The best approach is prevention. Mulch helps smother weeds before they start. Pulling small weeds while they are young is much easier than dealing with giant ones later, and whatever you do, never let them flower and spread seeds. A little effort early on saves you a lot of frustration down the road. I learned my lesson the hard way. Now I never let weeds get ahead of me. But the next mistake? It is something that many beginners think does not apply to them, until they start wondering why their plants keep getting weaker every year. Mistake number 10. Reusing the same soil without refreshing it. A few years ago, I planted vegetables in the same raised bed for 3 seasons in a row. I figured if I added a little fertilizer, the soil would be fine, but that year, everything struggled. My tomatoes barely grew, my peppers looked weak, even my usually reliable basil was turning yellow. I could not figure out what went wrong, until I learned that soil is not a bottomless resource. Just like a sponge that gets wrung dry, soil loses its nutrients over time. According to the University of Illinois Extension, plants deplete essential nutrients from the soil as they grow. Without replenishing it, soil becomes weak, leading to poor plant growth and increased disease risk. Crops like tomatoes, peppers, and squash are especially demanding, pulling key nutrients like nitrogen and potassium from the ground season after season. If the soil is not restored, the next batch of plants will struggle to thrive. The signs of depleted soil can be subtle at first. Plants may grow, but they look weak or pale. Yields shrink, and diseases like blight and rot become more common. Many gardeners think they are making mistakes with watering or sunlight, when in reality the soil is simply exhausted. Fixing this is simple. Rotate your crops each year so different plants use different nutrients. Add compost, aged manure, or organic fertilizers to restore lost minerals. If you use pots or raised beds, replace part of the soil each season to keep it fresh. A little maintenance goes a long way in keeping your garden healthy year after year. I learned this lesson after wasting an entire growing season on weak plants. Now I always refresh my soil before planting, and the difference is night and day. Do not let tired soil ruin your hard work. And now that you know how to avoid these beginner mistakes, you are on your way to a stronger, healthier, and more enjoyable garden. Gardening should be rewarding, not frustrating, but small mistakes can add up fast, turning what should be a peaceful hobby into a battle with struggling plants, aching joints, and wasted time. The good news: every mistake we covered today is completely avoidable. A little planning, the right tools, and knowing what to watch out for can make all the difference between a thriving garden and a disappointing one. Now, I want to hear from you. What is the biggest gardening mistake you have ever made? Drop a comment below and share your story. We have all had our fair share of gardening regrets, and your experience might just help someone else avoid the same pitfalls. And if you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to AgeWise for more smart tips on gardening, health, and staying active as you age. Thanks for watching, and happy gardening!